All right, for more on what to expect from tomorrow's fall economic statement, I'm joined by Goldy Hyder. He is the president and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Goldy, always good to see you again.
Likewise, good seeing you.
I heard Karina say critics worried about the deficit, and here you are. What do you want to see from the government on the fiscal track there? You've called for them to be more serious on their spending and come up with a new fiscal anchor. What are you hoping to see?
Yeah, we're very concerned that, there's only two sides to the ledger. There's the spending side and there's the revenue side. And we're seeing runaway spending. This is a government that has to update its spending every 6 months because it blows through its spending. And the reason is they had a path. They were showing us a path to balance. They were showing us a form of fiscal anchor. We didn't agree with the method that they chose, a debt to GDP ratio. We would prefer to see 10% of your borrowing costs should be the maximum amount that you're spending out of your revenues on that. That will force you to make choices. Are we going to see that? Probably not. We're going to see more spending. And this is very concerning because the truth is the programs that they think they're putting into for people are jeopardized if we don't get the fiscal framework right. It leads to cuts. So the promises don't get materialized. What's the point?
So the debt servicing anchor, 10 cents on the dollar, no
more than that. This is the David Dodge model that says no. We think that would be helpful. We think showing us a path to balance. And why is this, David? It's because of the fundamentals. The fundamentals are what? We're seeing an economic slowdown. So the revenues are going to drop. Inflation remains persistent, over 3.8% still, which is still almost twice what's there. We heard the Scotiabank come out with a report. We heard Governor Macklin say on numerous occasions, spending by governments is actually inflationary, and it is a part of the problem. And we've got to address the recession issue here. We've got to prepare for that, and I just don't think the government's prepared to do that.
Well, the Scotiabank report, which I've read, I mean, it's actually provincial governments who are also probably the biggest piece of that. Like I mean, the COVID spending was a big part of it.
That's my use of the word governments.
Yes, I know, I got you. A lot of people hear that and they think, Ottawa,
no,
right?
It's not.
It's even municipalities too. So, ahead of the cabinet retreat, you wrote to the Prime Minister arguing that the domestic economy was starting to feel the weight of high interest rates and inflation. Since then, we've seen growth numbers revised downwards, going into this period of sort of low growth, uncertainty, but with inflation sticky. I mean, where do you think we are now? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Do you see a path out of the challenges?
Well, look, everybody talks about this so-called soft landing, and I'm no economist, but it seems to be a very difficult thing to do. We may well be in a recession. They're usually confirmed after you're into one. We may well be into one. Certainly, there's an expectation that there is an inevitability to this, acknowledging that it's been like that for quite some time. So you got to prepare for that. If we're going to do runaway spending, if we're not going to have revenues up, if our borrowing costs are going to go up, we run the risk of a downgrade. If there's one thing I think people need to understand, even if they don't think about it, if the United States of America, who has been downgraded and recently changed from a stable to a negative outlook by another rating agency, if that were to happen to Canada, the borrowing costs go up. Those borrowing costs go up. We only have so much money, so it's going to have to be cut from somewhere. And so those very programs that may be necessary, I'm not questioning the value of affordability issues or housing. What I am saying is we've been warning you consistently that this day will come, and yet we spent and spent and spent. And now when we may really need to do it, it's going to be really difficult to do.
Right. You talk about runaway spending here. I think what we see in the U.S. is a whole other category.
We don't have the currency. We are not the U.S. dollar.
I totally get it. We're not the reserve currency of the world, but also the way that Congress operates.
But even they
with
suffered
continuing resolutions.
Even they had
I got you. So what do you do to get rid of a lot of the money we're spending? The new spending, certainly in the most recent budget, is on the green transition, which I believe you support. A lot of it's subsidies to businesses, right? Do you cut that? Where do you go?
Yeah. Look, a number of announcements were made previously under a different fiscal framework that they at least put out there saying, here, we're budgeting this. We were actually saying in the last budget, the best way to address these issues is growth. We have no growth strategy. Let's work on growth. The IRA forced countries around the world, Canada's just one of them. You either play or you pay, right? In some cases, you pay to play. Right. We're doing that. I acknowledge the efforts of the government to frankly exceed my own expectations and the expectations, I think, the business community of what it is that they're prepared to do. What the government has is an implementation problem. And we need to implement, we need to do so with greater urgency. We're waiting now for over 18 months from a report that the Prime Minister said he had commissioned, effectively saying, how are we going to ensure regulatory permitting permitting projects to expedite projects in our national interests to help our allies decarbonize. A priority of the government, a priority of the business community, but we're still waiting.
But in the short term, the runaway spending line that you've used, I mean, give me some examples of that. Like, what do you think you would like to see Chrystia Freeland say? I mean, there's talks about consultants and travel and stuff, but those are kind of at the margins of things.
I don't get to do the autopsy on the budget or the fiscal framework, but what I'm saying is let's just look back. You have a body of evidence here over the last 3, 4, 5 years, certainly over the last 2, 3 years when she's been, I think 2 years that she's been minister, having done more. Your forecasts are made, and 6 months later, they're gone. We used to be in an era, you've been in this town a long time, it's a 5-year forecast. You may miss year 3 or 4 or 5, but you don't miss 6 months. What that suggests is a difficulty in saying no, and we have to say no, and we have to make choices. And also, we're not growing our economy. The greatest asset of this country is our human resources and our natural resources. We should be leveraging those to the fullest to grow our economy.
I agree that we've seen changes from, say, a March budget to a November fiscal update, but the last 5 years have been unlike kind of any other.
I would give
5 years,
I'm not talking
right?
about COVID. I'm saying from COVID on, once you've had to put your house in order, I'm not the one saying this. This is being reported all the time. Every 6 months, somehow the forecasts are, oops, it's 10 billion, it's 5 billion. It's almost like a billion doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yes, it's the new million. But I wonder, Goldy, like if you believe what we're hearing, right? All indications is that it's going to be more of a return to form, or at least a step towards a return to form. Clearly, there's an urgent need to do something on housing, politically, economically, and just from a policy perspective. I mean, what do you expect to see tomorrow? What are the consequences of them not getting to sort of a more balanced sort of, not a balanced budget, but a balanced approach to doing the finances?
Well, look, we think they could send a really strong signal by recognizing the fundamentals of sound fiscal policy and having a fiscal anchor. The walking away from a fiscal anchor, even if it's not the one I prefer in the debt to GDP ratio, the walking away of a path to balance says to markets, hey, if you come here, you are exposing yourself to higher taxes, not just as a corporation, as an individual. Because people aren't stupid. They know there's only two sides to this ledger. Someone has to pay. We need to send a stronger signal for investment to occur, not just by foreign companies getting subsidies, by Canadian companies to say, stay here. I believe there's a real opportunity for Canada here. We are one of the gems of the world when it comes to natural resources and our human resources. We're blessed to be the neighbor of the G1. We have access to 1.5 billion people in our trade agreements. We have the cleanest electricity grid. We have ingenuity. We have academic programs. All of that. Let's leverage that in partnership with government. I don't see evidence of that happening.
The IRA response policies haven't done that in your
Well, they haven't done anything. There's not even a website.
Right.
That's my point. So if you have a spending problem and an implementation problem, you know what it leads to? You have a credibility problem.
Gotcha. All right, Goldy, thank you so much. That's Goldy Hyder, the President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada.